Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Weekly Movie Minute. I am Joe from Create Context. We are brought to you, as always, by CreateContext.com. Apologies on missing the Criterion 40 this week. I was away on vacation at a destination wedding, and I came back and my house was robbed. And that really sucked, and I just wasn't kind of in the headspace to do it, but I'll be back next week with another one. Today, we are talking about the Academy Awards. What I want to do today is kind of rank the Best Picture nominees. So every year, the Academy Awards chooses 10, sometimes less, movies to be honored as the potential best film of the year. And I actually like 10 movies. I think it gives an opportunity to acknowledge not just what are, theoretically the best films of the year, but also to kind of give a nod to movies that were just like cultural moments, cultural touchstones for the year. Last year we had like Barbie nominated, and then the year before that, or maybe even a few years ago, we had Top Gun Maverick, and those movies had little to no chance of winning, but they were such huge cultural moments. I think specifically like Top Gun Maverick, that movie really brought people back into the movie theaters after the COVID pandemic. It's important to give that movie its flowers and nominate it, right? Like, I think it's interesting before they started doing 10, if you look back at like the 2008 Oscar year, where The Dark Knight wasn't nominated for Best Picture, and it was nominated for like 6 or 7 other awards, which is cool. It was an incredible film. It even won two. I think it won sound mixing, and then it won obviously Best Supporting Actor, Heath Ledger for The Joker. His performance was incredible, so that makes a ton of sense. But it's really weird, right? Like, I like to think of looking at the Oscars every year, their Best Picture, as like kind of the most important movies of the year. Like, if you want a good idea of, where to start with that year in film, then go back and look at the Best Picture nominees, and that should give you a good idea. So I think 10 is a good, nice round number that we can all agree upon, and it gives us the opportunity to highlight, some major blockbusters, some indie darlings, and maybe even a great foreign film or two. 2024 slate has a little bit of everything. There's this wild, super grotesque body horror film, an incredible Gen Z Pretty Women-inspired film about social status and wealth, and there's even a Netflix movie with a problematic lead star. I wanted to weigh in and give my rankings of each Best Picture nominee, not ranked by my favorites. I'm not going like, this is my favorite, this is not, but I wanted to try and be as unbiased as possible. Obviously, you always bring in a little bit of bias, whatever you do, but I wanted to be as unbiased as possible and look at these 10 movies and say, objectively, which is the best, and rank them 10 to 1. So starting off first, this might not surprise everyone. Number 10, Amelia Perez. I'm going to rant just a little bit about this movie, and I hate to do that. I really don't like talking about movies that I don't enjoy that much, but Amelia Perez is just a bad movie. It doesn't just have this problematic lead actress. It doesn't just have bad songs or an incomprehensible plot, though all of those things are true. Amelia Perez is bad from a technical standpoint, an acting standpoint, and most egregious for a musical, from a sound standpoint. How this movie ended up gaining any traction is truthfully just beyond me, but thankfully it does look like the antics of its title star. This film is not going to win any major awards, sans maybe Zoe Saldana for supporting actress. I do think she kind of has that locked up, and she is the only, I don't even want to say saving grace because nothing really saves this movie, but she is the only technical achievement in this film. Amelia Perez is so bad in its narratives and themes that it is borderline offensive to the people it's trying to represent. Its portrayal of Mexico and Mexican people is painfully one note. The country, Mexico, in this film is just bathed in these weird, warm tones that visually do nothing to represent the country and almost feel like a cartoon version of Mexico. And the lead of the film, a woman who transitioned from life as a man as a means to avoid law enforcement, is one, wildly absurd while also being offensive. This film portrays Amelia Perez first as this violent, murderous drug kingpin before her transition to Amelia, but with her transition comes a total reversal of her entire personality. Gone are all of the nuances and dangerous aspects of her, and the film just then portrays her as this Robin Hood type of saint. It's a wild choice and one that does nothing for the film or the trans community. There are actually two really good movies that I just want to touch on briefly that came out in 2024 that I think do a much better job of portraying underrepresented communities. My biggest gripe with Amelia Perez, of which there are many, is that after she transitions, the film portrays her as this one note saint and makes her this sort of caricature of an idealized trans person. That's not representation, that's fantasy. You can have a sympathetic character while still showing their flaws. Amelia Perez, after transition, seemingly has no flaws. And it makes no sense narratively for a murderous drug lord to immediately become philanthropist of the century after her transition, unless you were just pandering to a certain base, which, truthfully, that's exactly what this movie might be doing. The first film from 2024 that I think does a much better job portraying underrepresented communities is Love Lies Bleeding. This is the second film from writer-director Rose Glass. Love Lies Bleeding is a period piece set in the late 1980s about a lesbian couple in an abusive relationship. Actually, the entire movie is about abusive relationships. The main character, Lou, played by Kristen Stewart, is estranged from her abusive father. Her sister, played excellently by a too often underutilized Jenna Malone. I wish we'd see her in more things. She's in an abusive relationship with her husband. And Lou, like everyone around her, finds herself in an abusive relationship with the beautiful but violent Jackie, played by Katie O'Brien. This film does an amazing job of portraying abusive relationships while also serving an underutilized community by showing them representation. Showing a queer relationship that has flaws, major ones, and how people from all different backgrounds can end up justifying their abuser's actions, especially when members of your community are so few and far between in 1980s rural New Mexico, is an important step forward in representation. This film shows real conflict, real trauma, and real abuse through the lens of the type of couple we do not typically see on screen. It's a great movie, and Rose Glass is quickly becoming one of my favorite directors. Check out her first film, Saint Maud. It's incredible. The other movie is another sophomore effort. This flick is I Saw the TV Glow from writer-director Jane Schubrin. Jane is a trans woman herself, and while this movie isn't explicitly a movie about transitioning, the subtext, it is barely hidden under the surface of a glowing TV. Not only does this film deal with the struggles of living your life in an uncomfortable body, it also plays on nostalgia and how we remember things as much better than they actually were. Justice Smith plays the lead character Owen in this film, and he's a flawed young man who has trouble standing up for and trusting in himself. He may not be as flawed as Jackie from Love Lies Bleeding, but Jane isn't afraid to portray a trans character, even a metaphorical one, in her film as one with flaws. And that's kind of the point I think Amelia Perez misses. Instead of creating a real character, a person that others in this other represented community could connect to or relate to or see a little bit of themselves in, director Jacques Audard made a fantasy character akin to the magical black man or the beautifully one-note female character who gets fridged at the beginning of a film. Amelia Perez is a nothing character, and it makes a film about her boring to watch and disingenuous to the trans community. I will now move on and get to number 9, which is Wicked. Wicked was a box office sensation and quite possibly the biggest movie event of the year, maybe behind Deadpool and Wolverine, but that flick wasn't going to get nominated for anything, nor should it. While the film has some technical problems, there's no denying its cultural impact on cinema in 2024. Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo give great performances, and they have the vocal talents to back up an undertaking this grand and epic in scale. Wicked is a fine movie, a successful musical, and most importantly, it's a pretty good time at the movies. It just isn't as great as some of the other movies that were nominated this year. Number 8 for me on my rankings of what I believe deserves it is Conclave. I think this is going to be a controversial choice, but Conclave to me is a film that feels like it's from a different era. The majority of this movie is just a group of men having hushed conversations while they struggle to make this big, giant decision that's going to have a lasting impact on millions of people of their own faith. It plays like a made-for-TV Aaron Sorkin movie, and I mean that as a compliment. I really like Aaron Sorkin. The biggest issue I had with Conclave is its ending, which fails to add anything meaningful to the movie. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but there is this final, truly bonkers reveal that honestly feels closer to like an episode of South Park than an actual plot twist. It's really out of left field. It makes this whole Aaron Sorkin-esque drama just fall apart at the very end. It does nothing for the plot, makes little sense narratively, and doesn't say anything meaningful about the Catholic Church or its antiquated traditions, though I fear it's trying really hard to. I try not to base my entire opinion on a film's ending, but sometimes Laszlo Toth is right. It is about the destination, not the journey. Number 7, A Complete Unknown. Timothy Chalamet's Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown, is barely a movie. I haven't timed it out, but I would venture to say that well over half of the movie is Chalamet singing Dylan tunes while people stare at him in awe. Honestly, the biggest conflict of this movie is between the film itself and us as the audience watching the screen, waiting for the iconic opening riff of Like a Rolling Stone to start playing. This doesn't make it a bad movie. It's one of the easiest watches I've seen this year, and Chalamet gives an incredible performance as music's greatest poet. The supporting cast is also stellar, with Monica Barbaro embodying Joan Baez and Elle Fanning giving a heartbreaking performance as she watches Bob Dylan rise farther into stardom and further away from her. It may be more of a musical play than an actual film, but it's a damn good one. Number 6 is Dune Part 2. Denis Villeneuve has done the borderline impossible with his adaptation of Frank Herbert's incredibly dense Dune novels. His, as of now, duo of films may contain just as many proper nouns and difficult to follow storylines, but they are also technical marvels, which are unrivaled as big screen experiences. The cast Villeneuve has been able to assemble is also amazing, with up-and-comers and consistent stars alike. I mean, everyone are in these two movies. If Denis can keep making movies like this, then we are in for an incredible ride with this director at the helm. Denis Villeneuve's films post Blade Runner are not my favorites. I prefer Prisoners and Sicario, even Polytechnique. These films are great, but his move into sci-fi and these big giant blockbusters is really what I love to see from Hollywood. Number 5 is I'm Still Here. I'm Still Here is the heartbreaking true story of Brazilian Congressman Rubens Paiva and the family he left behind after his capture by the Brazilian military in 1971. Fernanda Torres leads this film as Eunice Paiva, the matriarch of the family who must center the family after her husband's disappearance. Of all the Best Picture nominees, this is the only one that feels truly grounded on a single performance. I'm Still Here is a good film, but there is some flaws. It moves pretty slowly. It kind of rushes over a late second act and then final third act that really should be doing more to portray Eunice and what she ended up doing with her life after her husband left. But it is Fernanda Torres' performance that elevates this movie to one of the year's best. It's almost a real life parallel to the real Eunice, who was forced to ground and lead her family after the tragic dealings of the corrupt government. It kind of mirrors what she's doing with this movie, grounding everything and propelling this entire movie forward. I'm Still Here is an excellent film, and while I may have preferred to see something like Evil Does Not Exist or like maybe even Red Rooms as the token foreign film nominated, I am happy to see Fernanda Torres honored for her work in this movie. Number 4 is Nickel Boys. Nickel Boys is a bit of an experimental movie that takes a while for viewers to get their head around. When I first walked in, I knew very little about it, and the entire movie is shot, I shouldn't say the majority of the movie is shot from a first-person perspective that puts the audience in the shoes of the film's victims. It's very strange and pretty jarring and hard to get your head around, but the movie does a good job of kind of setting up with its first act, these first 20 minutes, leaning you into it and getting you surrounded and familiar with what the cinematography is doing before thrusting you into the main plot of the film. Nickel Boys is also grounded by some stellar performances, but it is the technical aspects of this movie that I feel is where it really shines. The camera placement, either in the main character's POV or behind them in present day settings, all add to the themes and narrative of this film. Movies are kind of like the super medium where you have acting and writing and song and sound all like blend together to make like one piece of art. And the way the cinematography represents and elevates the art of Nickel Boys, which also has an incredible script, screenplay. It's really incredible how all of those things work together. Nickel Boys might not be the easiest movie to watch, and it certainly doesn't have a ton of mainstream appeal, but it is a fantastic movie, and not just one of my favorites, but one of the best movies of 2024. Number 3, I have The Brutalist. Brady Corbet's third film is an epic immigrant tale. Monumental, some might even say. But what the film does best is harken back to an earlier style of cinema. The Brutalist feels like a movie made in the 1970s or even earlier. It's a 3.5 hour epic with no superheroes and no Vin Diesel jumping cars. It's just a story of one man's struggle for his art in an oppressive new land. The Brutalist is kind of odd because there's such a big story that's happening around The Brutalist, with Brady Corbet and him not making any money off this movie and working so hard to get it done and fighting for Final Cut. And that whole conversation happens in conjunction with the film itself, because that's what this film itself is about in many ways as well. It is about the final product, about this big, giant, epic masterpiece, this 3-hour film with a 15-minute intermission that finally made it into theaters, gets picked up by A24 for distribution. It's a whole thing. It's shot in VistaVision, so it does look gorgeous. It looks incredible. But I will say The Brutalist is not a perfect movie. It has an exceptional first act. I was really engaged the entire time, but the film begins to drag a little bit after the intermission. That isn't to say this isn't a masterpiece, just honestly, maybe a few edits could have cleaned up this long, monumental story. Still, it's Brady Corbet's vision that eventually made it to the screen, and I believe that is something that should be commended. Number 2 on the rankings is The Substance. The Substance might actually be my favorite movie of the year. I've been kind of going back and forth between that and Red Rooms. I love both those movies a lot. And I've watched Evil Does Not Exist again recently, and that movie's pretty incredible. But I absolutely loved The Substance. Coralie Farge's gross out body horror flick is more brutal than any Best Picture nominee I can remember in recent memory. This film is definitely gnarly, but its $77 million global box office run proves there is more to this film than just a standard body horror flick. The Substance is the best thing that horror has to offer. It has an interesting narrative, a thoughtful visual style. I mean, the colors just pop in this film. And there's these larger themes that are hiding beneath the surface of the plot. There are themes of aging in Hollywood, but there's also this really interesting kind of like parallel between drug use that I see. Carol Lee uses a lot of same techniques as like Requiem for a Dream, Darren Aronofsky's film, and you see these really quick, fast edits. You see this pumping, like electro beat soundtrack. You see injection sites. It's really interesting watching like your younger version of yourself use a drug a little too much and then having those effects immediately take place on the older version of yourself. It's just an incredible movie. Few films just look as good as The Substance, and man, it is awesome to see a film like this get as much attention as it has. I think Demi Moore is probably a lock for Best Actress for this movie, and it's well deserved. She does an incredible job. But moving on to my number 1. My number 1 is Anora. Anora is not my favorite movie of the year, although it is close, but I do believe it is the best movie of the year, at least the best movie of the year in this list of 10 candidates. Sean Baker has become a master of his craft, and Anora is both, in my opinion, his best film to date and his most approachable. I think of Anora kind of the way Prince thought of Purple Rain. Purple Rain was obviously his most iconic album. It was his biggest album, but maybe it wasn't technically his best album, right? Prince had like that album News that was only 4 tracks. Each track was like 20 minutes long, and some of like the most technically incredible music you've ever heard. My personal favorite Prince album, I think, is Sign of the Times, but Prince always referred to Purple Rain as his masterpiece. And that's kind of what I think with Anora. This is Sean Baker's masterpiece. This is like the one that he does that has a broad appeal, has a really good story, has incredible performance. It's like everything kind of comes together. And Sean Baker is an incredible director. And I love his movies like Tangerine and Red Rocket is one I really enjoy. Florida Project. These are all great films. But Anora just kind of brings everything together to make this an epic masterpiece of a film. Honora, it's propelled by Mikey Madison's performance as Annie. She's the street smart but still naive young exotic dancer who learns throughout the film that not everything is a fairy tale, not everything has a happy ending. It's a roller coaster of a film, one that lulls us in with this upbeat score. The whole first 40 minutes of the movie are this real feel good movie about this woman, meeting this guy who's uber wealthy and she's finally getting out of her life. Then the movie quickly shifts gears into the slapstick comedy that's really funny. Some of the funniest moments of the whole year are in this. And then finally, it gives us this tragic ending for our heroine that we've been rooting for the entire movie. But like Baker's best work, the director, he never offers a moral. He never gets preachy. He simply shines a light on people at the bottom tier of fortune. Honora is an amazing film, and it's one that I am going to think about and revisit for years and years to come. Thank you guys so much for hanging out at the Weekly Movie Minute. We will be back next week. I'll put up a post with everything we're doing throughout March. I'm pretty sure next week is Mickey 17. Very excited about that one. Bong Joon-ho's new movie, which should be pretty cool. And I hope you guys all enjoy this. And I hope you guys enjoy the Oscars on Sunday night. If you want to see more of this, me just kind of ranting about movies for a little bit, please give us a subscribe. That would be super cool. And I'll see you guys next time.